ISIL is a direct outgrowth of al-Qaeda in Iraq that grew out of our invasion, which is an example of unintended consequences, which is why we should generally aim before we shoot.
Yeah. You know what? Please, watch this. I just bit my tongue because I'd like to stay on the air. Joining us now is Ron Christie, CEO of Christie Strategies, former advisor to President George W. Bush and Vice President Dick Cheney, and the author of Acting White. And you also read him, of course, at the dailybeast.com. All right, Ron, I mean, what this man did yesterday was turn it around. It wasn't his abandoning Iraq. It wasn't his ignoring ISIS. It wasn't his calling them Little League or JV. It was Bush's fault that we now have ISIS.
Well, happy St. Patrick's Day, my friend.
Yeah,
I literally had to bite my tongue like you did, because when in doubt, what does this president do? Deflect, blame, project, never takes responsibility for his own actions. Let's look at Iraq the way that it was when President Bush left office. Iraq was relatively stable. We had negotiated a status of forces agreement that President Obama then put in the hands of Joe Biden, and you know what happens when Joe Biden's in charge. And then there was a vacuum that was created when the United States left against the advice of our generals, against the advice of our allies. ISIS and al-Qaeda filled that gulf, and in the absence of American leadership, what we have now, Steve, is an out-of-control Middle East due to this president's feckless and irresponsible foreign policy. A disaster.
It is a disaster. Now let's go to domestic policy, if you want to call it that. You wrote a great piece about called How the Media and Obama Made Ferguson Even Worse. You know, yesterday, and I did a Gimme 5 on this that's going to air later in the show. They got this guy on MSNBC. To her credit, the host read him the riot act for saying these things instead of just saying, oh, how nice. But he started out by saying he visited this guy, and he's supposed to be a pastor. He visited the guy in jail who shot the cops. But, of course, he wasn't a protester. He wasn't aiming for the cops. And then eventually it got to he was set up by the cops. And the cops beat him severely when he was arrested. I mean, and it's another myth that the media is going to allow to be put forth, and they'll be protesting in the streets with a new chant.
Unbelievable, Steve, but sadly not too surprising. We learned that from the Justice Department, of course, with Eric Holder going out on his witch hunt, trying to find racism around every corner. But we found out something very interesting. The whole myth, the whole notion of hands up, don't shoot. We saw professional basketball players, football players, members of the Congressional Black Caucus running around the country saying hands up, don't shoot. Well, you know what? That was a fiction that never happened. This the incident that you just mentioned, Steve, it's a fiction that never happened with this individual who claimed, oh, well, I wasn't aiming at the police officers. Oh, the cops got me. I mean, are you kidding me? It's these rabble-rousers that I strongly believe that are encouraged, if not supported by the media, that are encouraged, if not supported by the likes of Bill de Blasio, and unfortunately by this president and Eric Holder. And by the way, Steve, when the heck is he getting out of town, by the way? Seems like we can't get rid of Eric Holder.
Well, there's not going to be a vote because I understand the Democrats continue to filibuster the sex trafficking bill, and as long as that's not going to pass, there's not going to be a vote. Let me ask you, you're familiar, I think, I hope, with the McDonald's video where these 5 girls beat up this other girl. Even after she was motionless on the floor, they kicked her and stomped her and dragged her. Then, earlier in the show, in the last segment, I played a video from, I think, Indiana, I forget, where a black girl in a park with other black kids, but the black girl beats up this little white girl and her 5-year-old brother, and someone is heard at the park to allegedly say, you know, she said, what did I do? What did I do? And he said something about she's white. I mean, and this isn't, I would like to say, hey, what's going on here? But this is common. This isn't something that's like, whoa, an aberration.
No, it's not. And in fact, that McDonald's video is particularly disgusting to me, and I tweeted that out last week to show the folks who are, tune in and watch me on Twitter that this is black on black violence. This is every day. This is commonplace, and it's taking place in the cities that are controlled largely by Democrats. If you look at the crime stats in New York City, or if you look in Chicago, or if you look all across the country, there's so much black on black crime going on, and yet, where's the president? Nowhere to be seen. Where's Al Sharpton? Oh, there's no money in it for him. And I think the real tragedy that we see here, Steve, is that we have young kids being brought up in largely single-parent households where they don't have a strong family bond, and we see what happens with that. Poverty, violence, hopelessness.
You know, you would think that if Barack Obama had a daughter, which he does, He could come out and say, you know, that poor girl in the McDonald's, you know, reminded me of my own daughter. But no, he'd rather have a fictional black son that, of course, would look like Trayvon Martin.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just an outrage, and it just shows again that this president and this administration view people based on the color of their skin rather than looking at them as individual Americans. But yet and still, given the epidemic of crime that we have in certain communities of color, you would think, being our first black president, he would step up to address that.
Ron, great to talk to you, my friend. Thank you so much. Have a
Always
great
a pleasure,
rest of the
Steve.
day. Take care. Ron
Thanks, pal.
Christie, ladies and gentlemen. And when we come back, the great Andy McCarthy. Don't miss it.